All right. Well, this is a special occasion. BoulderNet strongly recommends connecting with workforce centers, especially Workforce Boulder County. So we're pleased to have Laura Novak with us today. She's a workshop facilitator with Workforce Boulder County. She designs in-house curriculum and leads career development workshops. I think they're probably all still online, but she'll let us know. She's a collaborator at heart. She seeks out workshop development projects with partnering agencies like with the state. She's a connector, developer, encourager, and creative. Laura, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. All right. Woo. All right, I'm going to share my screen and we will. Okay. Let me get this into the right mode. Okay. Let's see. Are you all still seeing notes or is it just the slides?
Seeing the notes.
You've
Okay.
seen the notes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Let's see. Let me stop sharing for a moment real quick. And beginning. Let's see, what's this? Sorry, I'm on a different computer today, so things are a little funky. Okay.
Yeah, it looked like you just need to go into slideshow mode.
Yeah. Okay, let's try it again. Slideshow. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, cool. All right, so I'm Laura with Workforce Boulder County. We're gonna talk about failure today, everyone's favorite topic, I'm sure. So just a little agenda for us and just making sure you're seeing the agenda piece now.
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about failure, what that might look like along the career journey. And then we're going to really spend most of our time talking about what it could look like to actually redefine success and failure for ourselves. With that comes a little bit of reimagining failure. And then at the very end, we're going to kind of orient to some resilience and a growth mindset. I didn't add this on the agenda, but I am going to end with just some more information about workforce specifically. So again, for anyone that's not familiar with workforce as a resource, I'll give you just some highlights of what we do offer to the community. Okay, so I would love to start with just a little group participation if you're willing. You can just pop this in the chat, or if you do want to unmute, you can do that as well. But when you see this word failure or hear me saying the word failure, what thoughts or feelings come up for you?
Disappointment that you didn't get what you had hoped to get.
Yeah, disappointment. Frustration.
Eventually hopelessness. I
Mm.
mean, if you get enough of it,
Mm-hmm.
rejection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And fall into the depression trap.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see someone put that in the chat too. Depression can lead to that hopelessness, those feelings, lack of motivation, Normandy put in an example in the chat of not finishing their college degree. That might be the first thought coming into mind. Yeah, sometimes we have specific examples. For me, most of the time when I see this word right now, I have a 4-year-old daughter at home, and this is the word that comes to mind when I think of like an interaction we had, like, oh, did not go the way I wanted. That felt like a failure. So we're going to have different associations depending on, where we are in this moment. Let's see, we have avoidance. Low self-worth. Communication failures. Oh yeah. Oh, Don, or who put this in here? Oh, Denise, what a cool perspective. Denise put in the chat that they believe everything happens for a reason. Sometimes hope for something better around the corner. I think that's so cool that even with the word failure, for you, there's a little piece of maybe hope attached, like, ooh, maybe something better is coming. I love that. We're gonna add to that perspective a little bit today. All right. And then Lisa added a failure in keeping or getting a certain job can be depressing. It can also be an attempt, or it can be a learning opportunity. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to definitely talk about that as well today.
Right. You learn what doesn't work, right?
Right. Yeah, totally. All right. Well, thank you everyone for, kicking off the morning, going here into this space. Okay. So there we go. So, some of what you all shared, what you voiced, these are really common, I think, shared experiences around failure. There's often a stigma attached to experiences of failure or really negative associations with failure. I think that's probably where most of our comments landed this morning. There were a few that turned that corner a little bit and saw maybe a glimmer of an opportunity for learning, to do something differently, an opportunity for, ooh, maybe something will be different next time. But most of our shared comments do seem to land in this, more negative association. And that, I think, is really common, a really common way to think about failure, experience failure, feel the failures that we do experience. So a few common threads among failure can be, sometimes it can be really attached to fear, a fear of others judging us because of that failure, or maybe even their perceptions of us and our abilities might change in light of a failure. Could be a rejection, a dismissal. It can also really show up sometimes in our work. So we're going to definitely talk about that. But, sometimes the stigma is, ooh, if there's a failure, if I experience a failure on the job or in the process of getting that next job, that can really impact my professional reputation, right? My professional journey. It might impact the opportunities that are available to me, right? It might close the door on some opportunities, or maybe it can even negate the accomplishments and the progress up until that point. And it can just kind of wipe it all away. So there's a lot of ways that failure can show up in our lives. And so what I want to say, I think everyone here probably knows this. If you don't, surprise, failure is just a part of the human experience. It is a part of living, and you know, and it can show up in, you know, our living, you know, kind of our life, our work life, you know, different facets of our experience. But it's universal. It is one of those things that we all have experienced or will experience throughout our lifetime. And not only is it something that is inevitable, I would actually argue it's pretty essential and necessary for our experience, for some of the reasons you've already mentioned, some of that learning, some of that growth that can happen from moments of failure. So we'll dive into that a little bit more as we go on. But even though failure is actually something very common, pretty universal amongst us, this is another question for the group. I'm just curious, how often or open are you about those failures that you've experienced? I'm just kind of curious. Are those moments things that you've been able to talk about with family, friends, coworkers, or is it something that for the most part has stayed pretty internal? Just kind of curious from you all, your experiences with that.
I actually have been very open. I feel it's just my personality, though. I talk about
Yeah.
things to work through them and actually understand what my role was in something. Was it totally the company? Was it me? You know, just to understand it. And quite honestly, I usually, through self-reflection, you know, that's why I wrote the comment. I do believe that nothing has ever happened that to me I didn't believe was a good thing. So I think it helps me personally deal with the situation and actually take a proactive stance going from it.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. Thanks for sharing that experience. All right. And in the chat, we have shared, I'm very selective with who I share with, right? Yeah, it might not be just open book with every single person, right? But being very intentional about who you're sharing those moments with and maybe processing them with. And yeah, have had it come back to haunt me or affect my reputation. Oh, I'm so sorry that when that does happen, it's really, yeah, that's really frustrating and unfortunate when it does have that impact on, you know, the reputation for sure.
Well, and I think there's a big, you know, what one considers a failure is also very subjective, right? I mean, I know that some people consider a layoff a failure, but having worked in HR, a layoff isn't, you know, a failure at all, right? I mean, sometimes a business downturn just means there's not enough payroll. I mean, I've been in meetings where it's like, how do we make payroll, right? We call getting on the phone with the banker to beg to have the credit line extended to make payroll, right? And then, you know, ultimately where we had, you know, literally had to lay people off because we just did not have the money. And, you know, that caused layoffs. And that was not a failure of the people that caused, you know, that got laid off. It wasn't a failure at all. Yet I know that some people that, you know, were subject to layoff, you know, took it as a personal failing and, you know, and felt failure, which is a completely subjective thing. You know, then they, I think, unnecessarily felt a failure, right? So,
yeah, Trent, no, I really appreciate that example. And you are so right that we haven't really defined yet, you know, what is a failure. And the reality is it is going to be different person to person. what a failure could be. And also failure can be interpreted really differently, right? Like payroll, staff management might, see this situation and say, oh, well, that wasn't the employee's, that wasn't a personal failure. That isn't on them. It's situational. It's because of all these factors. It's external. And yet the person who gets laid off very well might interpret that as a personal failure, that they didn't something enough or whatever it is. So I really appreciate you bringing those points up. And you're leading me into some really nice content that we are going to talk about how do we define failure and how do we define success, and really going through that process on an individual level, because it can be such an individualized thing. So thank you for all of that. Did someone else have their hand? I thought I saw a hand go up.
Oh, that was me. No.
Yes, hi.
I find that it's the environment of where you can share is also very kind of unique. Like in a professional setting, obviously it's not possible, but I'm not an advocate for organized religion, but I have noticed that in some like kind of spiritual circles, it's a little easier to be vulnerable or to share stuff because there is like a merciful tone to it. Whereas it seems like in, a quote unquote professional setting, things are a little bit more, I don't know, cutthroat, or just there's like a worship almost of like pragmatism and being like very, I can hold people accountable, and this is how it is. There is no ambiguity. So I think it's like it has to do something with that. But I'm not trying to say that we should all run to organized religion. I'm just saying that I've noticed that that's kind of like missing. I think there's like a selectiveness or like a partitioning of everything, and I think that partitioning is contributing to this fear of failure. This like we're sectioning off and compartmentalizing ourselves. We're becoming kind of psychotic, I believe. And I think that's what the fear of failure has done. And I've noticed with me, it causes like a retraction, or like you start to be just reluctant to share anything. And then you appear like you're hiding something, and then it just compounds upon itself. But yeah, that's all I want to say.
Oh, there's so much good stuff you just brought up. Thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree that context and environment is really something to consider. The different environments you find yourself in, whether it's in your work, your home and family, friend, right? Each environment is going to be a little bit different, and really thinking about that when you're, if this is something you're wanting to explore, what would it look like to be more open about my failures, maybe to bring someone into them a little bit. It doesn't have to be, it might not be your boss, right? It might not be your coworker. It might be more of a trusted friend, right? It's just going to really depend. So one thing that I think is really interesting is, thinking about this idea of, if failure is something that really is universal, whatever that looks like, tiny failures, humongous failures, whatever folks are defining as failures for themselves, it's universal. And yet, often we don't talk about it, especially at work, especially related to work. Often I would say, there's more of I'm just going to kind of keep that to myself. I'm going to keep quiet about that thing. And what that can do, often what that can lead to is holding on to that failure, feeling all the things associated with it, or thinking all the thoughts, the negative thoughts associated with it alone and in isolation, which can have a pretty negative outcome often, right? So there's something really powerful, scary, yes, right? Super vulnerable, but also really powerful to be able to talk with someone I'm not saying it's your boss, but someone letting them in a little bit to the things you're experiencing. The ability to have support around you during, or immediately after a failure or something that didn't go the way you thought it was going to, something that was a disappointment, something that, whatever, having support around you, that is a powerful piece that is going to really help you move forward and move through whatever that thing is, and be able to look ahead to what's next and look to the future and kind of get that momentum going again. Of course, we can do that on our own, and I think we often do. I also think it's easier when we have support around us, when we can have other people that can provide some perspective and some, just that assistance in the process. But when we keep those failures to ourselves, then we just have to figure it out all on our own. And that's a lot. That is a lot to navigate solo. And that's where some of that isolation and kind of getting into darker and more negative spaces, it's just a little easier in isolation. Something also about failure that's already come up a couple times is this idea that we can actually learn from failure. Failure is an incredible teacher of, has a lot of wisdom within it if we're willing to sit with it, reflect on what happened, maybe evaluate a little bit, those kind of things. So when we are able to share a little bit about our failures with others, it actually creates potential learning for other folks. I don't know if anyone's had that experience, but I know that I have learned from others, mistakes or failures or those things that they've experienced. Sometimes those are pieces of perspective or wisdom that we can learn from. So there's actually a really cool shared learning opportunity if we're able to be a little more open about failures that we experience.
Yeah, Laura, just a real quick comment about that.
Yeah.
I tend to find that I learn more from, failure is kind of such a negative word, but from a failure. And kind of a corny example is when you're, like, say, taking in an exam, and let's say that you're not quite sure you know what the answer is, and you kind of guess. If you get it right, I tend not to learn from that. But if I get it wrong, boy, okay, I know I got it wrong. I know what the right answer is now. I'm not going to make that mistake again. So I think those, keeping an eye out for those opportunities to learn from those little, I'll call them misguided steps instead of failure.
Yeah, totally. And there actually is a lot of information out there that speaks to just what you said, Steve, that the things that we learn from failure often stick with us longer or in a more impactful way than when we're successful. So I think you got it. You're right there. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to peek in the chat for a minute because I think a few things are in there.
Well, yeah, just in the subject of failure, a great example of the power of failure, I think, is Elon Musk. I think one of his big mantras is fail faster, right? We just want to do things as quickly as possible, try them. And if their harebrained scheme doesn't matter, let's find out what doesn't work, right? We'll try out anything, and if it doesn't work, that's fine, right? Yeah. If it blows up on the launch pad or whatever, that's fine. But at least we'll know it doesn't work, right? Fail faster, right?
Yes. Yeah, and there's
sounds like he was stealing from Edison
right.
with that comment.
Totally. Yeah, failure, right? It's not a new thing.
Right.
And yeah, Trent, there's research out there that actually looks at things like how the rate you know, the rate of failure, like how often you try things and the length of time in between. Well, I did attempt 1, I waited X amount of time before I tried again. Like the shorter amount of time between attempts, that can actually lead to higher levels of success. So there are ways, yeah, to engage with failure, right? Things not working in a way that can really lead to success down the line, for sure. These are great. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted on that one. Oh, I think just because a few people mentioned this idea of like the environment that you're in, kind of that like kind of mercy or you know, cutthroatness of the environment you're in and how that might have an impact on like I mean, honestly, it's going to impact how you go about anything, right? If there's such a fear of failing that's created by the environment you're in and the leadership around you, right? That's going to impact how work is done, how, you know, if you're going to try or not try, or how often you're going to try, if you're going to talk about what happened, if it worked or not. So I think there is definitely that piece that's really important, especially I'm thinking anyone in the room that is you know, in or seeking, you know, more of those leadership positions. I think that's just something to really think about. Like that's where a lot of the culture is created, is by leadership. And how is failure, you know, what's the philosophy of failure in that organization? Is it okay to fail? Is it not okay? Is it like the worst thing ever? And you know, how that might impact everyone around you and how they're going to go about their work. I think there's a lot there to think about. Okay, I'm going to move us ahead. So let's see. So I'm going to actually practice for a minute talking about some of my career failures, since that's kind of where we're at right now. And, you know, I want to talk about this idea of, you know, this, I call it the nonlinear career path. So essentially, for me, growing up, both of my parents worked. So I saw them going off to work, heard them talking about their jobs. They were my primary role models of what work looked like in that relationship with work. And my understanding of what a career was that it was very linear, that the process was pretty straightforward. You know, you went to school, you graduate, you get a degree, you get a job, and then you do that job, and then you're there, right? My dad's a professor, so he, you know, I don't even know how many years he's been teaching now, but like, you know, he was on the tenure track. So everything was just laid out step by step, very linear, and that was kind of what it was to be successful, have a successful career. I did not have that experience. You know, I went to school and I studied film, knowing full well that I didn't actually want to work in the film industry. I just was like, that sounds really fun, and I would love to have this experience and play with all the fun toys during my time and be super creative, and I'll figure out the job thing later. I graduated college, had no idea what I was going to do still. So I took kind of a gap year to volunteer. Then I, you know, tried a couple different things. And now I think I'm on, I would consider it kind of my 4th career at this point, just being in some different, pretty different sectors of work. So I would say that my career path looks a lot more like this maze, not anything but linear, like bouncing all over the place, hitting dead ends, feeling like, oh, I have to like kind of backtrack. I went back to school at one point, got a master's degree, hoping that would give me a clearer path. It didn't. But to me, this has really felt until fairly recently, maybe within the last 5 years, my career trajectory has felt like a failure. And no one else, that might not be the same for anyone else, but to me, the journey I've been on has felt like I have failed because it did not mirror the career journey that I saw in my parents, that I came to internalize as this is what a successful career looks like. And mine just looked really different. So it took me a long time and a lot of reflection to really come to a place where I was like, oh, actually, my path is not a failure. It's just really different compared to that of my parents or what I thought it was going to be like for myself. So failures along the career journey there's so many that might be there, and it's going to be different person to person. It might look like not starting a career and then, ending your career there. I have a coworker who she was a teacher for over a decade, and she left teaching to actually come be a trainer with us, which we're very thankful for. That for her, she's expressed that has felt like a failure on some level, that she wasn't able to stick it out being a teacher for her entire career. Failure in the career path might look like, this is another thing I experienced, it might look like not having a job that you're 100% passionate about. That's another thing I saw in my parents, which I actually think is really rare, is both of them loved the work that they did. So my understanding of work was it was supposed to be something that it was your passion. And I really did not find that. And I would say the job I'm in now is the closest where I'm like, ooh, I actually really enjoy the work that I do. It uses a lot of my skills and strengths. I feel really good about the work I do. But I had this definition of career success is when you're doing your passion 100% of the time. And that has never been, that has not been what I've experienced in my own journey. So that has felt in a lot of ways like a failure over the years. So this is just something to think about. What are the ideas that are in your, just kind of that you've internalized when it comes to work and career? And what are those pieces that have felt like, ooh, this didn't go the way I thought it was going to. I thought it was supposed to be this way and it wasn't. Just something to think about. What I like about this image of the maze is that I think this really captures the idea that the importance of looking at the full picture. So we can have, we have these seasons, we have, right now where we have the last year or the last 5 years or, this job, that job. So we have all these little moments in time. Some can feel like a success, some can feel like a failure. It's really powerful when we can pull out and look at the big picture. When I decided to go back to grad school, that to me felt like I was in a corner of this maze. I tried all these things and I was just stuck. And I was like, well, I'm in a dead end. I don't know what to do. I guess I'm going to go back to school again because I have no idea what I'm doing. And that really, to me, that actually felt like a big failure, was not being able to figure out what I could do and instead have to go to school and spend tons of money and go into debt again. But when I pull back and I can look at where did I start and then what's the path I've been on and where am I going? Where do I want to go? What are the goals I have for myself, in the long run? What are my kind of overall career goals and what I want for my future? That can be really cool to look at where you started, the path you're kind of on, and looking at the overall movement that you have made towards whatever that those longer term goals are. Because sometimes when we're just right there in the corner, we're up against the edge of the maze, it can feel like, well, I made a wrong turn. Okay, I guess I'm just stuck. I'm done, But if we can pull back and look at the full maze, we can actually see, oh, we've made progress. We are moving forward. or maybe, yeah, we're moving closer. We're moving towards whatever that future is that we want for ourselves. I also like this image a lot of, I think this can really is a nice visual for sometimes a lot of when we're in this space of we're kind of stuck in those thoughts of failure. Sometimes we're just stuck in the immediate of this just happened, right? And it's so fresh and it's all we can see. It's what we're experiencing in that moment. Very internalized, right? This is where we might get really isolated in our experience. But when we can pull back and look at the full picture, we can sense, you know, we can really get a sense of, oh, yeah, that sucked that this just happened, or, you know, I'm really disappointed, or whatever about whatever this thing is. But we can also then see all the successes we've had up until that point, right? All the movement that we have made. So being able to shift eventually, and I'm not saying you know, just do it, you know, the same moment you get that call that you didn't get the job, give yourself space to feel that disappointment, to feel all the feelings. And then after you give yourself a little space for that, then it's okay. Let me pull back. Let me look at the big picture. Where do I want to go? What are my next steps? Where, you know, how am I going to move forward, right? So being able to shift outward a little bit can be really helpful in that process of moving forward. Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time here. This has come up already, but thinking about even just like what is failure and what is success. So Trent mentioned this a little bit. What's really interesting is if you look up definitions of failure, it's not satisfactory at all, the information you're gonna get. It's things like, oh, failure is the opposite of success. It's the absence of success, the lack of success, right? So really, if we want to have a better understanding of what failure is for us, we actually need to get really clear on what success is first. So my challenge for everyone here, if you want to do a little homework, would be to spend some time really defining what success is for you. It's going to be a little bit different for everyone. Maybe you've done this process at some point in your life. Maybe you are already really clear on what success is for you, but maybe not, because often things like, you know, the definition of success, often we're born into a family or into a community or into a culture that already has their ideas of what success are. And we kind of take those on, we absorb a lot of those messages. And some of those might be really aligned with what our own definitions are, but we don't often take the time and space to actually think about it. Like, ooh, are my family's definitions of success, are those, do I share those? Do I share all of them? Are there any spaces that are a little bit different for me? So defining what success looks like for you. And then from there, there's the ability then to really understand when something doesn't meet that success, right? So one cool way to do this, if you're up for the challenge of really defining what success and then, you know, as a result, what failure looks like, I would say it can be really helpful to think about your values as a way of defining success and failure. So values are essentially the things that are just the core of, you know, how we operate, how we see the world, how we prioritize things and make decisions and all of that. So again, this is going to be a very individualized process to figure out what your values are and kind of narrow in on them. If you haven't done this, I really recommend it. It can be so helpful to have an understanding of what your core values are. They really do show up a lot in how we look for work, what kind of work we're looking for, how we show up on the job, how we interact with other people, right? So I put a link down here. I'll send these slides to Trent or Dawn to make sure they can be shared out. But I did put a link here to a list of values Brene Brown has. It's just like a little PDF you can download, and just a nice simplified list. But basically you can just go through and pull out the values that you really identify with and kind of narrow it down to, I usually like to say 3 to 5 of your kind of core top values. So these are things that really just drive your decisions, your behaviors, what you prioritize. So when we think about what our values are and then what success is, there's a way to link them together. So I could use an example for myself. So one of my core values is, I would say, like integrity. Sometimes I go with authenticity, but I'm feeling integrity this morning. So integrity. So, and part of that for me is, it's really being true to, what I'm thinking and feeling, that is in alignment with my actions. So, so for instance, a few jobs ago, I was offered to move into a different position. The person in that position was leaving, and I was kind of asked, like, hey, Laura, do you want to take on this role? And so I asked for all the information, and essentially the offer was, well, even though this role has more responsibility, it's essentially like a program management position. It is a different level of work than what you've been doing. There's no salary increase. Granted, I was working with a nonprofit, so I'm not surprised, but I got all the information, and what I did was I actually had a conversation with my supervisor and just laid out like what I was thinking and feeling about it. Like, I just felt like, because it was a position that had a higher level of responsibility, there was a programmatic element, all of these pieces, that it did deserve to have a higher salary than the role I had been doing. And I laid all that out, and I essentially advocated for a higher salary with that role. Ultimately, it didn't happen. The budget was too tight. They weren't able to honor that. So in some ways, I could look at that experience as a failure, right? Like, I didn't get what I wanted. I did not get that salary increase. It didn't go as planned. I was disappointed, by the outcome. But looking at it through my values of integrity, that actually was a success for myself. It was having a conversation, open, for me, a little bit of a tough conversation with my supervisor, and just being really open about, this is what I want and what feels like is deserved. And that was if I look at success, that was me being in integrity, with myself in that moment. So it's kind of cool to be able to put this lens of our values onto situations that we experienced, because that can give just a different layer of, maybe ultimately this thing didn't happen the way I wanted or work out how I hoped. Oh, actually, there was still a piece of it that I could say was a success, because I was in alignment with my values. So that's just something interesting, a different way to think about defining success and values. Or success and failures are through your values. Okay.
Yeah, well, Laura, if I can interrupt. Yeah, I mean, I think it's typically success and failure are portrayed as being sort of binary.
Mm-hmm.
Either you succeed or you fail, but I don't think that that's really an accurate paradigm, right? I mean, in the reality, you know, as you experience and as Elon Musk kind of points out, in all failure, you succeed at learning something, right? I mean, I think in a lot of things, it's kind of a yin and yang, right? There's a little bit of both in all experiences, right? And I think if one thinks about either you see, you know, even in win and lose, right? I mean, you win the game, but you got a bunch of injuries, right? Or you lost the game, but you learned something. You know, we won the Super Bowl, but half of our players, you know, go to other teams, right? So next year, our team is much weakened, right? So, you know, the things are not as binary as portrayed, right? So, right. So, you know, I feel like a big failure, but is that really true, right? It's binary, right? Everything, there's some gray and stuff. So anyway,
I love it. Totally. Yeah. And again, I think it goes back to that idea of like, you know, that image of like the maze, you know, maybe there's this like setback right then, but that doesn't like take away everything up until that moment. It doesn't negate all the things that have been learned or whatever up until then. So yeah, it's not just a black and white either or often.
Right. Yeah. Or I got laid off, but you know, and that's really terrible that I no longer have that job. But there are things about that job I actually hated. I hated the commute and I hated this, that, right. And now I really felt like it was dead end. So yeah, now I have to do a job search, but yeah, I get to move on, to get out of that dead end job and get opportunities to advance my career and, you know, or whatever. So, you know, everything. Yeah.
Yes. So these are just some questions, you know, and these will be in the slides. So again, if you want to engage with, you know, looking at your values a little bit, thinking about success and failure through values, I think these are some interesting questions to also think about, are just looking at some of the past jobs that you've had with your values right at the front of your mind and thinking about, did that work? You know, did the company, did my team, did my supervisor, did it align with my values or not? Because those can be two really different experiences within a team or working with a supervisor or just kind of work overall. So there's just some follow-up questions if you do explore values a little bit after this. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit just about, we've already been doing this, but just bring it home with, you know, what does it look like if we think about failure in a different way? I heard someone say, you know, failure just feels like, I mean, just even just like the word itself can feel like kind of gross, right? Like really negative. Like there's so much attached to this word of failure. You know, is it possible to, you know, redefine it, think about it a little bit differently, put some different associations around the word? And really ultimately it comes down to like, can we embrace it as something that actually has a lot to offer us and give us? So I like to think failure is pretty cool. I'm trying to get the rest of my coworkers on board with this, but I just feel like failure has so much within it if we can, you know, kind of shift from avoiding it at all costs, right? Staying really quiet about it, minimizing it. But if we're actually able to embrace it as, hey, this is just part of life, this is part of the journey, this is actually something that teaches us, right? This is a lot of what Trent was talking about, and, you know, Elon Musk and Edison and, you know, tons of innovators, right? You know, failure is this, I mean, it is this thing that allows us to not only learn about ourselves, I mean, that's a lot of it. We can really use experiences of failure to learn more about what works for me. Wow, I tried this thing and that approach didn't really work, or my method for doing this just went in a totally different direction. We can learn more about how we operate, how we learn, how we take in information. We can learn about our limits. We can learn about how to get really adaptive, you know, how to, you know, what skills we have, what skills we might need to grow. So we can learn a lot about ourselves through failure. We can also just, you know, learn in general, right? We can learn how things work, why things didn't go the way we thought they were going to. We can use failure as an opportunity to really evaluate the situation and use that information to possibly like reorient. Maybe we're working towards a goal that isn't actually feasible. Maybe we have to look at the goal that we have and shift that accordingly. Maybe things like that. Maybe the career, that we're looking at, maybe we're getting some information of like, actually that's not really working, or I'm not getting to the point that I thought I was going to get to. Is there something I can change so I can get the result that I want, right? Ultimately, I think failure also can be freeing if we're able to embrace it. This, I think, speaks to that larger piece of like context and environment as well. But imagine you're in an environment where failure is really looked at as part of the process. It's inevitable, it's going to happen. And guess what? Embrace it, because the more you fail, the faster you fail, you're going to be learning and learning and learning and setting yourself up for a greater chance of succeeding. If that's the environment you're in, or if you help even create that internal environment for yourself, that could be liberating. That can really be a shift away from fear, a shift away from paralysis of like perfectionism of like, well, I'm not even going to try unless I know I'm going to do it 100% right. So there can be a lot of freedom also to just be creative and innovate and just try stuff and see what happens. So if there is an environment that looks at failure that way, it can actually lead to some really cool things. Okay. And ultimately, failure, a great way to look at it is it's feedback. It's a feedback loop. You're getting information every time you experience a failure. And then what matters is, what do you do with that information? Do you take it and adapt and integrate that information, or do you ignore it? Or do you just keep doing what you were doing, right? So a lot hinges on what you do with the information you get from failure. This actually goes exactly to what Trent was talking about, that like fail faster idea. And there's just, some cool research out there that shows, it really, everything hinges on the learning that comes from failure. And so and then if you are engaging in that process and doing it multiple times at a pretty small interval, you're more likely to reach some success, because that learning space is going to be like, ignited. So we already talked about that a little bit. And then these are just some questions that if you take a little bit of time tonight, tomorrow, if you're like, I just want to think about failure so much more after this talk. These are some great reflective questions to think about. Like, just find a moment that felt like a failure to you. And then think about some of these questions of like, what is it about this? I wonder why that was what popped into my mind. Why has this experience stayed with me? How has it impacted me? Did I learn anything from this? Do I do anything differently now? If this is not a practice that you already do, it sounds like, I think it was maybe Denise who shared that this is something she's done. This can be a really helpful practice to spend a little bit of time reflecting on a moment of failure, and also thinking about those moments of learning that happened from it. So we're working to kind of reframe and redefine failure. Okay, and this all connects to growth mindset. So just this perspective that we have the ability to learn and develop throughout our lifetime. A lot of the things we've talked about are rolled into the growth mindset idea. Things like, looking at challenges or obstacles as actually like those are opportunities, that small, little things can lead to big successes. So growth mindset's a really cool thing to explore. And it looked like at Long Speak Net, they're going to be talking about that at their next session. So that's pretty cool. And then I'm seeing the time. I know I just have like a moment or two left. I did just want to share kind of on the heels of all of this about, thinking about failure, but really thinking about it, reframing it as opportunities to learn and grow and to move forward. Workforce is an awesome resource for all of those things. I'm just going to do a quick little highlight reel of some of the things that we offer and ways that you can get in touch with us if you are wanting to connect. So one of the things that we do are career workshops, we do financial workshops, we do home ownership workshops. This is kind of my wheelhouse. I supervise our team that leads all of these and also teach. And we have incredible workshops related to these topics that I would encourage anyone to check out if you're kind of looking for those opportunities for learning. We have just lots of services around career and education. So whether you're on unemployment insurance and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to navigate this, I have questions about my claim. Guess what? We have staff that are very familiar with unemployment insurance. They can help you navigate that. If you're exploring, like, maybe I want to go back to school, maybe I want to pursue some training or a certificate to move into whatever's next, we might have some funds available for short-term trainings and certificates. We can also potentially connect folks with internships, apprenticeships. So if you're, again, looking to maybe move into something totally different and wanting to find a way to get some experience, those are often opportunities that we can connect folks to. We also have a whole young adult program. So if you have a young person in your life that's looking for support around career or education, we have a whole program devoted to them. We prioritize veterans. So if you know someone who is a veteran that is in this process of job search, please send them our way. We have lots of supports. And then we also offer, we do things like hiring events. So if you're looking for work, we have lots of ongoing job fairs, hiring events that we can get you connected with. And then this last slide is just our contact information. So you'll have all this in the slides that Dawn sends out, but this has ways to get in touch with us, where we're located, so that you can reach out. All right. That's what I got.
Well, Laura, thank you so much. That was great. You've provided lots of valuable information and advice and a lot to think about. And I think you give us a good taste of what Workforce offers. And I think I've gone through all the workshops. I highly recommend all that. So thank you very much. I think we're going to stop recording. And if we have maybe a few questions, people can speak more openly with it not being recorded. So Trent, maybe I can do it.